Welcome to the new For Purpose CEO podcast.
I'm Michelle.
I am Danielle, and we are here to talk about being a CEO in the for-purpose sector. Each episode, we will talk about issues not-for-profit and for-purpose CEOs need to manage based on our 30-plus years of experience. It will be an honest discussion of the highs and the lows, helping you tackle the unique challenges of running a NFP.
Leading can be challenging and sometimes lonely. We get it. Join us and our guests weekly for an honest discussion about running a for-purpose organisation. We will be sharing practical tips, shared experiences and real-world stories to help you tackle the unique challenges of running a for-purpose organisation.
Today we actually wanted to talk about managing different personalities within a team. And Michelle, you and I, when we caught up yesterday, we were talking about how this is some of the work that you do as part of your coaching with other CEOs. So what are some of the main issues that CEOs come to you about when they're talking about their teams?
It is a really challenging part of being a CEO, I think, which is to get a high-performing executive team, get a team that reports to you, but also, it's a broader organisational issue, right? To manage an organisation which is made up of people, and people have wide-ranging communication styles, listening styles, collaboration styles, and to kind of harness all that and get a high-performing team. And I think one of the things that I often hear from CEOs is, if it's going well, it's going well. But then when things start to not go well, that's when you start to see the impacts of the different communication styles or listening styles. And I think that's where we're fortunate. There's a lot of different tools and writing out there available, easily Googleable, in terms of the way different people communicate or work together, collaborate, and how you as a CEO can either deal with it directly, I guess, or even assist managers to deal with their teams. And so I think some of it for me is looking at what's the issue, what's the problem, sure. But if we're talking about the personalities of the people involved and the communication styles, I just go through a few models, and I think that helps to take the conversation away from that particular person or the way that person does things, and lets you kind of be a little bit more objective. So look, there's a number of, I guess, systems I would use. Like, I've done a bit of work with the Gallup Strengths, where, you get someone to do a quiz run by Gallup, and they come up with a list of 34 strengths in order. And so, there might be an X or a Y or an activator, whatever, whatever they're interested in and good at, which, may conflict or sit well with others in the organisation or the team. And so, if you've got someone who's really good at coming up with ideas and starting things, but not very good at completing things, then that's really going to annoy potentially someone who is like, well, you never finish anything, but actually we should be celebrating their creativity and pairing them with someone who maybe is very analytical or detail and takes some joy and is really good at finishing things. Another one I try and get people to think about, because it's so quick and easy, is the DISC, so the DISC. Again, so much on the web about this that it's very easily Googleable. You can do a lot of learning and research on this and become much more adept at it and understand it a lot more. But I think it's good as a really quick and easy one to sit there and say, well, if I got someone in my team who's quite dominating, or if I got and always wants a quick decision and action, or if I got someone who's always going to think about the impact of things on everyone in the team, and they're, not going to say yes because they're concerned about the impact on people. And that's a very different approach to a problem.
With the use of the tools, it helps the CEO, the leader, identify sort of some personality types or some behavioural types that they have within their team, so that they can start to map and plan how to work to the individual's capabilities and their strengths. Would you also suggest that is conversations that you have with, as a CEO, that you have with the individuals or with the team as well, so you build the awareness within the team?
Yeah, definitely with the team. So quite recently I went into a senior leadership team, and we did a really quick quiz. You can do it online. about DISC styles. And again, it's not to get really into the DISC styles themselves, but more to say in our team, we have people with different ways of communicating. And so when there's a problem, is it a problem about communication styles? What sort of problem is it? Because often that kind of takes the heat off it, and it always gives you a shared language to enhance the communication. So I think it's really useful as a starting point to look at, if there's communication issues, can this help?
And it helps your peers take it away from being, oh, that person's behaviour is X because of these issues, and they can personalise it about the individual to, oh, I get why I have a tension, potentially, if there's an issue like communication with that person, because their behaviour in that situation is very different to mine. And I've done this with teams as well, where you can then open up a conversation about, like, now that you can see the strength or the capability of that other person or those people around you, how would you utilise or leverage those capabilities and strengths to support you to do your job well as well? So you start to kind of build, I suppose, that social capital, sort of coming together and working together a little bit more than perhaps they might have been because of the awareness.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I think it's also been useful for me, and when I was a CEO, I used to very much do this. And I think, I think to some extent, CEOs do this kind of naturally anyway, or good CEOs. So say, for example, your big picture, your very big picture, strategically where you want to go. It's all about driving. You're quite an inspirational leader about driving, in the strategic direction. If you're not overly analytical and details orientated in that, you need someone close to you on your team who's got that skill.
Yeah, but that requires a bit of self-reflection on the CEO too, doesn't it? To sort of understand their own strengths and their own limitations, or even their own interests. Like, as you said, a CEO, big picture, don't get any joy out of the detail.
May not get joy out of the detail, but I think one of those interesting things is where you go, oh my God, I'm getting bored by the detail. Actually, I do need to know some of this detail. Or when someone's talking to you and you feel like, oh my God, they're getting in the detail, you think, well, hang on, we do need to know this detail. Like, actually, this is detail we need to know. Or, choose who you delegate and how you delegate, what you delegate, right? So
based on their strengths.
But then also, you can have that conversation with the person who's, say, for example, overly detailed. You could say, listen, you're getting really into the detail, which is your tendency, which is your strength, which you love to do. Because then you're not saying, oh my God, you're so boring and you're getting stuck in the weeds. You're actually having a conversation which says, listen, you are really playing into your strengths. We need you to recognize you're going overboard maybe, whereas I'm pulling you in the opposite direction. So the conversation just changes the tone, and I think it becomes much less combative and much more collaborative.
There's an awareness, but equally there's a respect. Yeah. That's what I particularly like about StrengthsFinder, having used it several times myself and gone through it with various teams myself, is that what might be on the face of it opposing strengths, where conflict can emerge because of those strengths, you don't sort of make it about the person. You sort of say, oh, and I think we spoke about this yesterday, one of my top 5 strengths is empathy. I work with somebody whose top 5 strengths is analytical. We often have tension, but we name it straight up. Like when we fall into that tension, we name it straight up. I'm like, oh, that's my empathy strength. That's your analytical strength. We're just not working well. But hang on, let me stop and listen to you, because the analytical side of you has a very important statement to make, and I need to listen to that, and vice versa. And we actually move out of that with really great solutions, and we can find that work. Or the other thing about StrengthsFinder I really like is that we all have strengths we can overplay.
Yeah.
And then they become a weakness.
Well, look, and I think that's your job as CEO. You have to bring the team together, and you have to bring the best out of the team members. And I think you do that with your executive, your people who report directly to you, but you should really empower your team to do that with their teams as well. So I think I'm very much along the lines of, it probably doesn't really matter which tool you use, as long as it's a tool that allows you to identify the different communication styles which may then lead to conflict, And so you've then empowered your team with language, with ways of identifying this source of conflict, and you've then actually enhanced team dynamics. So I think that's a real tool that CEOs can have at their disposal for team building, enhancing team collaboration. I mean, there's a number of them, and I particularly also like the 5 dysfunctions of the team model. And I think, again, there's a lot written about this, but it's quite simple, but it's a really good one to look at when your team isn't working. And if you're the team lead, or you can empower your managers to use this tool, then they can see, well, what's our problem? Have we got, for example, the one which I think is quite common is this fear of conflict. Is there an absence of trust? Is there a fear of conflict? A lack of commitment? No accountability? No attention to results? So lack of conflict, I think, is an easy one, because it's often one where people are being polite, or they, have a meeting after the meeting, or they, there's lots of different conversations going, whereas, a good team will have really robust conversations and be able to disagree.
And know how to have a debate.
Yeah.
Without personalising it. So each person in the discussion is still safe.
Yes.
With disagreement, but is able to still put their points forward and be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, building that sort of speak up culture where people can voice disagreement with, whether that's the direction or the project that are being discussed, and people are able to take that disagreement or alternate view and say, actually, let's pick it apart in terms of sort of objective criticisms, as apart from, oh, well, that person always criticises everything. You've really got to be looking at the substance of what they're saying. So, look, I think there's, the nice thing is there's lots of tools for CEOs to use.
And knowing what's available, how to use them, whether you yourself, depending on the situation or the context of the team's dynamic, whether you, the CEO, run those sessions, whether you bring somebody else in to actually help facilitate, so you, the CEO, can actually be a participant to it as well. There are also sort of techniques and strategies that you can do at a more granular every day-to-day level, can't you, just to keep team function moving forward. Because I always say when there's stress on a team or stress on an organisation, it's almost like you're putting a magnifying glass over the cracks, and those things actually come to the surface and you become aware of them. But there are actual things you can do day to day that really actually help keep a team moving forward.
I agree, and I think that each CEO will set up their own rhythm, whether it's, different team meetings or check-ins, but also being quite clear about what sort of behaviour and values the organisation has. And so one of the things I always say to organisations or CEOs that I'm working with is, if you have some corporate values, what does that mean? What does it mean for the behaviour? Does it mean, if someone says, oh, my value is X, I'm like, well, can you tell me what that means in terms of, therefore we do X, therefore we don't do X? I really want concrete examples.
Yeah, what behaviour is attached to the value, and then what behaviour is seen to contradict or not be in line with the value, and then how do you manage that out?
Absolutely. And I think sometimes these are hard conversations to have. Like, it's quite hard to pull people up, but it's never that definitive as well. Like, quite often behaviour which is problematic to culture or collaboration, it's very rarely, one massive big thing, or it's often, it could be overt, or it could be sort of passive behaviour or quiet behaviour, or it's not shown to everyone behaviour. So it's really hard for you as a CEO or someone empowering team leaders to work out the way to work productively with team members in a way that's also very positive. We were talking about this article in the Harvard Business Review, which I think is a really good one. It's short, when resentment is building on your team. And I think the thing I love about that article, which is from August last year, is kind of talking about the different ways that resentment and discontent, let's say, to generalise it, appears. And so it might be that someone's vocal in complaining, or it might be that they just actually become very quiet and they don't contribute. And for example, those two examples, you deal with them differently.
Absolutely. And it puts it on, it's the responsibility of the CEO to always be observing, and to take action on those behavioral shifts in individuals immediately and engage in that conversation. Don't let those things fester where it becomes potentially an issue, becomes something so much more overt, or there becomes an event where, an action needs to be taken, as opposed to there's lots of clues we're given in leadership. And appreciate CEOs, you're stretched already. There's already lots of things you've got to deal with, lots of priorities. Actually identifying when behaviours are actually changing are indicators of whether it be resentment or whether it be a dysfunction within the team, and starting those conversations with individuals to be able to get to the core and address it.
And it's going to depend on the size of the team, the size of the organisation. And so one of the things I think is very much about the CEO, it has a responsibility to, empower their managers to also deal with behaviours in a way that is in line with the organisation values. So it's very much having that clear communication with your direct reports around their team management and their style. And I think as a CEO, you really have to very much be really supportive and helpful and empowering of your senior leaders, so that, there's that consistency throughout the organisation of how issues are dealt with, because that can really undermine culture if there's an inconsistency about how different team leaders manage problematic behaviour.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And for some CEOs, that probably requires a little bit more courage to have those conversations, or to identify or put in solutions, because they're not easy conversations when you're sort of calling out a person's behaviour.
Really hard. And I think also, I guess we probably should preempt this with, that check-in with the person, because, we don't know what's going on in their life, right? Like there might be a perfectly valid reason that someone's not performing or slightly off kilter. There might be, we don't know what's going on in their life. So I think again, to me though, if you have a culture where people are not scared to speak up, where there is this sense of safety and trust in the organisation, then you would like to think that you will, if someone has an issue at home or with their kids or with their family or other outside stresses, that they can go and say, listen, this is going on, and that likewise the organisation can respond and giving them a bit of grace and a bit of time. And obviously doesn't give them excuse to behave badly, but it might be that if they're not responding as quickly or, whatever, we can actually build that time in both ways.
Absolutely. One of the things I often do as well, a lot of organisations, you said, have values. Many organisations also have code of conduct, which sets the behaviour very, very clearly. It was a tech firm and their code of conduct was just don't be a jerk. It was super simple. I really loved it, actually, because I was like, every interaction you have, just don't be a jerk about it. But that's a simple version. But there's, other sort of more detailed versions which actually set out that behaviour. I like to do a bit of an activity regularly with teams around, well, if we have a code of conduct, what does that mean? How do you understand that? How do you interpret that?
But also it has to be not too general and waffly. I remember going into an organisation once and I was talking with that, what are the problems? And one of their problems said, everyone's on their phone in meetings. And I said, well, what do you do about it? And everyone's like, oh, we kind of ignore it. We kind of don't ignore it. And then when it gets, if no one's listening, we call it out. I'm like, well, you've got a code of conduct. Why don't you put in your code of conduct? You're not going to be on your phone when you're in a meeting. And everyone's like, oh, can we do that? I'm like, you can put what you want in your own code of conduct, right? If it's not illegal. But I just thought, well, surely if your meeting's going on too long and everyone's on their phone, then that's a sign, right? So the meeting is not of value. People think it's a waste of time. But if you've got good meetings, then people won't be on their phone. So I think it's fine to say, look, for the duration of this meeting, we want everyone's brain focused on the problem at hand or the issues at hand. And we expect you're not going to be on your phone because you're paying attention. I think that's fine to say. But I think, if people are bored or not paying attention, then either question what they're doing in the meeting.
Or question the meeting.
Question the meeting, right? Why are you having that meeting?
Exactly right. But that's a good example, isn't it, around if you want to use a code of conduct as a bit of a tool, is that you might also run sessions where you do scenario planning. So here is the behaviour, here's our code of conduct, where does it fit or not fit within the code of conduct? How should the organisation respond to that? Or how should leadership respond to that? So that also gives individuals a voice in also outlining what they consider to be acceptable or not acceptable behaviour, and also can understand how personalities actually play into that. And again, that can be led by a leader within the organisation or somebody external to open that up. Should the organisation be at a point where it might need that kind of discussion? My suggestion is you do those things like you would do them regularly, no more than, once a year, but regularly enough where you're just touching base with people.
Absolutely. And I think the problem sometimes is that meetings can be dominated by behaviours that you actually don't want to dominate. So there's someone who talks too much, or someone who waffles on and doesn't get to their point regularly, or people get shut down, or people aren't allowed to voice their opinion. So meetings are often a reflection of the culture in the organisation, or the power or the politics in the organisation. And so I think to the extent that those things exist, they're going to be reflected in meetings. And I think one of the things is that, you've got to be able to call it out. You have to have a mechanism to call it out. And, there's many different ways of doing it, but you really want to have a good chair of that meeting who's going to, say to people, we don't have time. We're all busy. We don't have time for someone to, rabbit on in a meeting. We need pre-reading. If pre-reading is necessary, you need to have done it. We're not going to go over stuff that we've already just been sent. Like, the meeting should be there for a very specific focus. And, is it a decision? Is it an update? Like, what sort of meeting is this team meeting? So that they're not boring and a waste of time, and, and can be done as quickly as possible. Absolutely.
We all know was it the meme, this meeting could have been an email. Yeah. So
this is so true.
We've all been there. So if we had to sum up some of the key points from the podcast in terms of managing the different personalities, we're saying use the tools that are available to you.
There's a lot of tools available. I think use them as a way to analyse what are the different personalities. And I guess we're using personalities in a kind of a loose term, right? Like, we're really talking about communication styles and interaction styles, problem-solving styles. So see if you can actually analyse what styles you've got, either as your direct reports or across the organisation, and how do they impact the culture of the organisation and the efficiency of everything from meetings to interactions. Do they build silos? Do they increase collaboration? And I think I definitely share those tools. And I mean, when I was a CEO, I used to say, look, these are my preferred tools, but doesn't mean there's not other ones out there, right? Like, if someone can come to me and go, actually, this one's much better, to me, it doesn't really matter which one we use. It's just we've got common language. We are able to identify issues, problems, and maybe talk around solving them. So I think that's a real strength of a good CEO, is identifying who they've got in the organisation, who they've got reporting to them, and they've empowered their managers to do the same.
Absolutely. And we're seeing behaviours emerging that are not acceptable within the values of the organisation or the established code of conduct. Immediately engage with the individual or the individuals, show some empathy, understand perhaps what's going on in their lives and what the organisation is able to do to be able to support them, so that you can take action, prevent some of that resentment that might emerge as a result, and encourage, as you said several times, Michelle, encourage behaviours within an organisation where there is a speak-up culture, where people actually feel safe and know that behaviours will be addressed, because the organisation's culture will be hard on the problem, not necessarily on the person.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that too.